Hello, students, and welcome to our very first screencast in human anatomy. Before we get going, I just wanted to highlight a few things about just the strategies for taking notes in this class. So on these screencasts, I'm going to be following a Google slideshow, and I just want to point out, if you go to your Schoology page for human anatomy, for every unit in the course, you will find a folder, and in every single unit, there will be a folder called Notes and Study Guide. And you will find that the slideshow that I'm going through is available to you right here. This might be useful because on occasion I'll have links to videos and things like that that I normally show in class, but can't really show on a screencast format. And I think some of them are worth doing, or I might have access to other resources, or maybe just want to go over it again. So those slides are there available to you. Also, I want to point out this study guide. So if you click on this study guide, you will note that it begins with all of the objectives for what you should be able to know and do at the end of each unit. But then if you scroll down, you will find that there is an outline for the notes. And you can just kind of see how the major topics are organized. And so you can kind of see there's sort of a few main ideas in this first unit: anatomy versus physiology, levels of organization, and then vocabulary of anatomy and physiology, and the integumentary system. So as we go through, you're going to find that my slideshow will follow these bold terms as we go. So the wise human anatomy student would have this out and available. And then as you're taking notes, you can kind of use this to see how ideas relate to each other. Is this a new idea, or is it kind of a sub idea within something we've already been discussing? I would encourage you, by the way, to take notes on these screencasts, and you could just simply pause the video so that you have time to write them down, or you could just use the slideshow, pull it up individually, and kind of take notes as you go, independent of the screencast, whatever works for you. But I definitely think there's a lot of value in kind of writing this down and give yourself some time to process it. So with that background, and without further ado, let's hit it. So this introductory unit is all about body organization. It just kind of looks at how the body is put together. And I want to begin with just a basic overview. What is anatomy and what is physiology? And maybe you have your own idea. Perhaps you could take a moment to figure out, do I know what anatomy and physiology are? What's the difference? And if you don't, well, here they are. Anatomy is the study of body structure, while physiology is the study of body function. So physiology, function. So here's some fun facts on the next page, and I want you to pause the video as you look at these fun facts. Read through each one and decide, does this tie into anatomy or does this tie into physiology? So go ahead, do it. I know you're thinking about skipping it, but don't. Do it, engage, and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, we're back. Hopefully you paused and went through. We'll just go through these really quick. Number one, we're talking about the size of this particular area in a dog's nose. That's really dealing with structure, so this would be anatomy. Number two is a physiology, because we're shedding skin and losing cells, which is a process. Three is anatomy, because we are talking about just how many blood vessels there are, the length, which really deals with structure. Four, we're back to physiology, because it's a function, right? We're talking about how frequently fluid is filtered. Five, we're basically counting bones, and so that's anatomy. And then six is physiology, because we're talking about a function, right? We're producing saliva, which is a physiology thing. So hopefully these fun facts intrigued you, and we'll be kind of exploring these kinds of ideas throughout the course. So levels of organization, and again, if you're following along in that outline, you'll see Roman numeral 1 was anatomy versus physiology. Roman numeral 2 is levels of organization. And so if you're taking notes, as I hope you are, you hopefully are seeing the value of that study guide outline to kind of keep things organized. So here's a picture of a human. My apologies for the nudity in this diagram. But you can see that there's a lot of levels at which we can study the human body. And in this class, we're going to focus on kind of a subset of this diagram, but we're going to begin with your sophomore year of Edina High School here and what you learned in chemistry. In chemistry, you learned that there's this basic unit of all, not just living things, but all things in general that makes up all matter. And take a guess, what is it? It's atoms. Now, if you take those atoms and join them together, you get a more complex structure, which is this. Hopefully you know that is a molecule. And in chemistry, you explored atoms and molecules in great detail, with perhaps a bit of sorrow and misery along the way, but hopefully you have some sort of understanding of those structures. In biology, we took these molecules and we focused on some big ones: carbohydrates, proteins, fats, nucleic acids like DNA and RNA. And we said, let's just put all those together and make the basic unit of all living things. And those were cells. So chemistry kind of ends at this barrier, at this border here, and now biology begins. And if we take a bunch of cells and join them together, we get something called tissues. Now, you didn't talk much about tissues in biology, probably. And so that's where I want to pause this diagram and explore a little bit more for this class. So let's just hit pause on this button and dive into tissues. So there's basically 4 main tissues in the body, and you don't need to write these down yet because we're going to talk about them one at a time: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. So let's get to know each one. So first, epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue, its job is to cover or line external and internal body surfaces. So to understand this, or to explore how these are classified, there is a diagram. This diagram is actually found in your study guide. And so, if you have the ability to print that, that would be great. If not, at least access it digitally and you can see these. But what I'd like you to do, if you're printing it and writing on it, is, well, first of all, take notes on these differences. So epithelial tissue can be broken down based on the cell types that make up the epithelial tissue and the number of layers in that epithelial tissue. So there's 3 cell types that are found in epithelial tissue: squamous, which are flat shaped. Think of it as squashed, squamous or squashed, flat. Cuboidal, which have kind of a cube shape, and columnar, which are kind of a column shape. So thank you, gods of naming. Those are all fairly straightforward. They're pretty descriptive. Epithelial tissue can also be described by the number of layers. So simple epithelial tissue has 1 layer, while stratified has many layers, and pseudo-stratified has 1 layer, but the cells have different heights, which kind of makes it look stratified, but it's not quite stratified. One might say it is pseudo-stratified, hence the name. So just kind of jot those down for notes. And then I'd like you to take this diagram, and again, if possible, it'd be great to draw this, to draw these lines in on your own copy if you have printing capability. And you'll notice I've broken it into sections: section 1, section 2, section 3 here, and then section 4. And I want you to take, look at sections 1, 2, and 3 and identify each as simple, stratified, or pseudo-stratified. So if you look at number 1, all of these cells are either simple, stratified, or pseudo-stratified. For 2, again, all 3 pictures are either simple, stratified, or pseudo. 3 is simple, stratified, or pseudo, and we're ignoring 4 for the time being. And then identify each cell as B through H as either squamous, cuboidal, or columnar. So you're going to use those definitions that you wrote down from the preceding slide and try and categorize this in 2 ways. Is it simple, stratified, or pseudostratified? And is it squamous, cuboidal, or columnar? So, and for purpose of this, you can ignore A. Since epithelial tissue, by definition, covers structures, A is simply the thing that is being covered. It's called the basement membrane, and you'll see A is in all of these structures. So we kind of ignore A for purposes of this diagram. Okay, hit pause, see if you can do that. Write your answers down, whether you can print this or not. Just jot on a piece of paper, commit, and then let's come back in a moment here and see how you did. You ready? Boom, here we go, we're back. All right, here are the answers. So number 1 is simple. And the reason it's simple is you'll notice there's just 1 layer of cells, 1 layer of cells, 1 layer of cells. 2 is stratified because there are many layers of cells, many. And then 3 is pseudo-stratified because there's one layer, but you got these little shorty cells in here that make it look a little bit stratified. So this is pseudo. And then B through H. So B, these cells are fairly flat. They're kind of squashed, so these are squamous. C, if you use your imagination, these are kind of cubish, cube-like, and so these would be cuboidal. And then D are columns, so these would be columnar. So for the full classification, you would say that that this first diagram would be simple squamous, C is simple cuboidal, D is simple columnar. Number 2, all of these are stratified, so these kind of flat cells, F would be stratified squamous, G would be stratified columnar, H would be stratified cuboidal. So then what about 4, section 4 here. This is kind of a unique type of tissue. It's called transitional epithelium, and it's found in the bladder. The reason I have you skip it is if you just look at that picture, you would think, oh, that's stratified cuboidal, and there's just no way you wouldn't think that based on the picture. But it's actually transitional epithelium. What's the deal? So what's interesting about this particular tissue is these cells are able to slide past one another. So if you look at the picture, if you can imagine like layers of cells like this, they can actually slide past one another. And this is found in the bladder because if you have an empty bladder, it's going to be kind of small, but then as it fills up, the bladder fills up with urine, those cells slide past one another and it allows it to expand. It's a bit like a balloon. If you blow up a balloon, the balloon gets thinner as it's stretched out. So because of that, it allows the bladder to fill. And next time you're urinating, you can think of the transitional epithelial cells kind of sliding into more and more overlap as your bladder constricts. And, there's kind of a no talking rule in the men's room for the men, so you can't really talk about it. But ladies, I think you guys can talk. I'm not sure how that works. Okay. Here's just another picture. When your bladder is relaxed, that transitional epithelial cells are kind of bunched up on top of each other. And then when it's stretched out, they kind of slide past one another and change their shape a little bit. So there you go. Take another moment and see if you can identify these 5. Hit pause, see how you do. All right, we're back. Is anyone actually pausing? I don't even know. But here are the answers right here, and I'll just verbally go through them. This would be simple columnar, simple squamous, pseudo-stratified columnar. D is actually simple cuboidal. This is weird because it's a tube. They're kind of rolled into a tube. But if you imagine sticking a scissors in that opening and slicing it and kind of unrolling it like that, you can see the simple cuboidal. And then this is going to be stratified squamous. So that is how we classify epithelial tissue. One kind of interesting question you might be asking yourself is, why do we care about this? Like, this is kind of boring, Mr. Sanger. Is this class going to be awful? And no, it's not going to be awful. I kind of think of this in Star Wars. This is kind of like the desert planet of Tatooine, where it's like intriguing a little bit, but you're not sure if it's entertaining or not yet. But just wait, it gets better. Here's why we care. Here's one example. The type of epithelial tissue can inform give you a little bit of information about the function. So here we have a pair of lungs, and the purpose of the lungs is to exchange gases. Oxygen goes in and carbon dioxide goes out. So if you want gases to be able to sort of go back and forth across the wall of the lungs, you would want a fairly skinny wall for that gas to pass across. And so guess what kind of tissue we have there? Turns out it is simple squamous. And simple squamous, is flat cells and a single layer. So by having a single layer of flat cells, it creates a really thin wall, and then oxygen and CO2 can pass right across there. So a lot of times there's kind of some logic to why a particular epithelial tissue type is where it is, and that's kind of why we care. So I'm going to pause there, and then we'll pick up with part 2 of this video to look at connective tissue, the second type. Thank you.